The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes? Greetings, I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer, USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate -269932.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about the combat readiness side of, the combat training side of mission readiness. Combat readiness, I suppose, is also a thing. But before we get into today's topic, we just want to get out a couple of things. First, the housekeeping. These recordings typically take place at 12:30 p.m. South African Standard Time on a Tuesday, which is understandably and admittedly an awkward time for a lot of people. But if you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew and you are able to join us for these recording sessions, please do so. Come and find us in the Screening Room channel in the Dauntless Discord. There you can watch live, you can participate in the chat. If you are doing that, please make sure that if you have a comment or a question that you need me to see and address in the Q&A session at the end of the video, please make sure that you tag me in it. So at Admiral Owen Swart, to make sure that I see your question when I'm scrolling back through the chat at the end of the video. This is because there can sometimes be quite a lot of chatter in the chat, which is great and that's fun, but not all of it needs to be addressed necessarily on screen. So if there's something you need me to see, something you need me to address, please make sure you have tagged me so I can find it when I'm scrolling back up a little later. Otherwise, if you're not able to join us live, that is perfectly acceptable. You can watch us on YouTube after the fact or on Facebook after the fact. You're welcome to drop any comments or questions you might have in the comment sections on either of those platforms or on Discord if you are a Dauntless member, or send them to me directly using any communication channel you might find convenient. I will do my best to address it there and then, or possibly include your response in an upcoming briefing video. Next thing we need to do is remind everybody who we are and why we're here, because sometimes some of you might be finding this video as your very first exposure to the briefings with the Admiral series and might not have the foggiest clue what we are talking about. So let us do that. Let us do a quick recap of what the USS Dauntless is, what we do, and why we're here. So first of all, what is the USS Dauntless? Dauntless is a future-focused advocacy group with, at its core, a Star Trek fan club. Why Star Trek? Because Star Trek is it's a vision of the future that is optimistic and presents a way forward. It presents a vision of how mankind's future could turn out. I beg your pardon, my house has just turned off my fan. It is about 1,000,000 degrees here in Cape Town, South Africa today, so I'm just going to turn the fan on before we continue. Hey Google, turn on the black fan. Thank you. Apologies. The house just decided to turn the fan off for some reason. That was surprising. Anyway, let us continue. So, Star Trek depicts an optimistic vision of the future of humankind in which most of the problems that we face in today's society, things like poverty, disease, crime, war, have largely, if not entirely, been solved, at least on Earth, if not throughout the rest of the galaxy. And who came up with that vision? That was this guy, Gene Roddenberry. Our specific mission as the USS Dauntless is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East. Why do we have a mission? Well, because we are a Starfleet-style group. What that means is that we have taken some of the elements of the fictional Starfleet, which is the organization around which most of Star Trek is based. The fictional Starfleet is an exploratory and military service within that fictional universe, that imaginary future. We are neither of those things. We're neither exploratory nor military, but we have decided to adopt a lot of their philosophical drives and a lot of the values that they depict on screen. And in order to reflect that physically, we've taken a lot of thematic elements from the fictional Starfleet. Among those is our organizational structure, which is kind of sort of like a military. And in fact, it's inspired by the United States Navy, the present day US Navy. So we have a rank and a rank system. We have uniforms. We have a chain of command, all very much like present day military, although we ourselves are not a military organization. Our organization, Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is our parent body, is structured like the fictional Starfleet, where there are very many ships, hundreds of ships. Each ship is a chapter, which is a group of members in a local area somewhere, and that is thousands of members, hundreds of chapters across dozens of countries around the world. Starfleet International is the single largest organized Star Trek fan organization in the world, and we are proud to be the flagship of Starfleet's 8th Fleet. But our mission has a number of clarifying points. So we have broken down our overall mission, which is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East, into a number of standing orders of varying importance. And today we're going to be addressing a sub-point understanding order number 2, which is to encourage initiatives to help bring about the future envisioned in Star Trek. So we think that the vision that Gene Roddenberry came up with for what he imagined humankind might evolve into over a couple of centuries through a number of social, economic, technological, and scientific advances, we think that that is pretty cool, and we would like to see that world come about. So we here in today's world will undertake projects that we think might help move our world closer to that optimistic future. And within that, we one of the things we want to do is we want to work to better ourselves mentally and physically. We want to make ourselves the best possible version of ourselves, because if we are better, then that inspires and encourages other people around us to become better too. But it also means that we are more capable then of servicing missions in order to help other people. So to help people who need help is the first bullet point underneath that standing order. And the better we are, the stronger, the smarter, the more resourceful, the healthier, the better overall we are, the better versions of ourselves we become, the more able we are to help people who need help. And that's what combat training relates to. So there might appear to be an inherent contradiction in what I've said so far. Okay, I'm done with this. Let's switch back to this. There might be an inherent superficially inherent contradiction there when I said that we are not a military, and then I talk about combat training. So let me be clear about what I mean by combat training as it relates to mission readiness. So combat training is the disciplined practice of techniques and skills to effectively apply physical force against a target, fostering physical fitness, mental resilience, strategic thinking, and controlled use of force. So while Starfleet International and the USS Dauntless in particular are not military institutions, there are many benefits to be had physically, mentally, psychologically, in many other ways, from learning how to apply force onto another target in the world. When I talk about applying force, I mean that in a number of different ways, whether it's the force from your fist or the force from a weapon or anything like that. There is a sense of understanding yourself as an agent in the world, as a being in the universe, when you can understand and appreciate and learn to regulate your ability to apply effort, energy, work, force onto other people and things in the world around you. The more force you can apply to other people, the more important it is to learn how to manage that, to learn when and how it is appropriate to apply force onto people and things around you, which is an imperative part of this learning process of learning combat training. But also you learn to appreciate just how powerful you are as a being in the world. And that will help you to understand how much agency you have and how much of a force for good you can be, or a force for change in the world, and help in helping to bring about that optimistic future of as depicted in Star Trek, of Gene Roddenberry's imagining. So what kind of things count as combat training? Well, I've got a non-exhaustive list here. So the obvious thing that springs to mind, obviously, is martial arts. Karate, judo, taekwondo, Krav Maga, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and so on. These are very obvious and well-recognized combat training systems. They are essentially hand-to-hand, where you're learning to punch, kick, block, roll, tuck, and pull people over and throw people over your head and all kinds of interesting things like that. You're learning to muster the power of your body, and also increasing the power of your body in order to direct force onto other people and targets in the world. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got target shooting. So this is holding an actual weapon, typically a firearm, and learning how to fire that weapon accurately, which sounds very, very different, but in principle, they are the same thing. You are learning how to effectively and with accuracy and with control direct force out into the world. Target shooting with a firearm, you have to also learn how to master yourself. It might not be anywhere near as physically demanding as something like Krav Maga, but target shooting also requires a considerable degree of mastery of self. You need to learn how to hold yourself still. You need to learn to regulate your breathing. You need to learn how to perceive objects in your field of view, monitor your the state of your body in order to be as accurate as possible. Related to that, of course, is archery. It's a very different kind of weapon. You're using a bow and arrow, but the principles are the same as target shooting. You're learning how to convey that projectile, that missile, that arrow through the air onto a target in a way that is as accurate as possible. Archery, of course, is slightly more physically demanding than target shooting, I imagine, because you need to have a certain degree of physical strength in order to pull back the string of that bow and hold it in place and so on, but no less skillful. Related to that are things like knife throwing and axe throwing. Again, you're learning to launch a projectile from your body onto a target far away, and learning how to do that with accuracy comes with no shortage of a need for skill and practice. On a perhaps more playful side of the same part of the spectrum is things like paintball and airsoft and laser tag, where you have a simulated weapon, a weapon that can do little to no physical harm to the person that it hits. Something like paintball or airsoft could potentially bruise your opponent when they get hit, which is why you have to wear protective eyewear so that you don't get hit in the eye. But it's probably not going to do any lasting harm. But you're doing the same essential thing. You're learning to direct a projectile across space and hitting a target. Laser tag, the projectile is, of course, a stream of photons, not a physical bullet, but the principle is the same. And then back to sort of the more physical, direct melee styles of fighting. You've got things like fencing and tactical combat, historical combat training. This is my martial art of choice, historical European martial arts, where we learn how to fight with weapons, specifically the kinds of weapons that would have been used by my European ancestors in centuries gone by. My personal favorite is the long sword, which is a two-handed straight sword that's roughly, I don't know, about 1.5 meters long. What I find interesting about historical European martial arts is that most of the traditions contained within that discipline have been lost to history. Some of them still survive to today. Fencing is one example of that. So fencing is the modern sportified version of old fighting techniques that were developed to train soldiers on how to fight with their weapons in centuries past. Those training systems became sportified, turned into games where soldiers could score points against each other while practicing, and then they became then divorced from the actual fighting systems as the gaming systems developed over time, until now you're left fighting with a weapon that only superficially resembles a sword. But a lot of the same principles still apply. The historical European martial arts is essentially an agglomeration, a conglomeration of multiple different fighting systems, most of which are also gamified training systems from centuries gone by that have just been lost. But those manuals still exist and can be decoded. They're well written and sometimes well illustrated, and we can reconstruct what those old fighting systems would have looked like, and we can practice them today. And that is a lot of fun. Combat sports, things like wrestling, MMA, and that kind of thing, those are also sort of generic, sort of general hand-to-hand combat systems. MMA is more of a tournament system where you are learning different fighting modalities from whatever source you can find, and then you're bringing that to a competitive setting. Wrestling is more of a discipline in itself, or several different disciplines. You've got different kinds of wrestling. And boxing and kickboxing, of course, are also historical systems that are still available today. And then you've got virtual combat simulations. Now, virtual combat simulations are right on the edge of what we would consider combat training from the Dauntless point of view. So when you're talking about something like a first-person shooter game, in a game like that, even though it feels not that dissimilar to what you'd be learning in a target shooting environment or a paintball environment, it really is quite different because of the physicality of what's involved. If you're operating your digital avatar using a mouse and keyboard, you're not actually learning how to aim a physical object that's resting in your hand. But virtual reality simulations kind of sort of bridge that gap where you're manipulating a virtual object in a digital environment, in a simulated environment, but you are actually making the gestures with your physical body. In order to classify it as combat training, we would have to assess the specific details of the combat simulation you're talking about. Why does it matter if we would count it or not? We'll get to that in a moment. But virtual simulations are right on the edge between what we would and would not count as a combat training modality for the purposes of the Dauntless. Now, these activities collectively enhance physical, mental, and tactical readiness. Now, here on the Dauntless, we support combat training of our Dauntless crew members through the Combat Training Program, which is one of our many, or now 4, different ongoing monthly challenges. What the Combat Training Program does is it encourages each of us to study on our own time the combat training modality of our choice. As I said, in my case, my preference is for historical European martial arts, HEMA, which I practice on my own. I used to practice with a local school, but the logistics of that didn't work out. So now I study it solo, and I practice in my gym, where I get a lot of funny looks when I'm doing my solo sparring drills in the aerobic studio. But it's fine. I'm used to that now, and that's just how that is. But if you are a target shooter or an archer or any other kind of martial artist, each member of the Dauntless is encouraged to study your combat training modality of choice on your own time and in your own space, and then report back to the crew, specifically the chief security officer, the progress that you have achieved by logging the time that you've spent studying your preferred combat training modality. So when I'm doing my HEMA solo drills, I log that in my fitness training app using my PerScan device. And I submit a report on any day that I have done my solo drills to the chief security officer on the combat training channel here in Discord. At the end of the month, we or he, the security officer, would add up all of the training sessions you've done up to and including up to a period of up to an hour, and then you'll tally the number of hours that you've spent, and whoever spent the most hours studying their combat training of choice would then win the commendation for that month. So that's how the combat training program works on the Dauntless. It's pretty straightforward, and it works pretty much the same way as our other training challenges. Because there's no way to score effectiveness of your training of one modality against another, especially when you're talking about modalities that are so different as jiu-jitsu is from archery. There's no way to compare those two things. It's apples to oranges. So the only universal component that both of those things share is the amount of time that you as the practitioner spend practicing your preferred combat system. So that is the thing that we use to measure one against the other. So it's one of the challenges that crew can participate in to fulfill the mission readiness goal. So if you are inducting into a duty station, if you're one of the crew members who are in the process of being evaluated to take on a duty station, one of our volunteer duty stations, participating in the combat training challenge will meet one of the criteria that you have to satisfy in order to meet the minimum activity requirement. So you don't have to participate in combat training. There are 3 other challenges to choose from, but this one would count if you chose to use it. And it's also worth noting that gaming, at least gaming in a physical way, can be used as a mission readiness tool. So we have had on many occasions over the years set up gaming. Gaming again is kind of a nebulous term, but missions that allow us to practice combat training systems together. So paintball is an obvious example of this. If we all go out to a paintball field as a group, or laser tag or airsoft or anything like that, that allows everybody the opportunity to train on some combat training together, and we're all logging some time in one go. And that's a fun afternoon or morning for everybody. But what are the benefits? Why do we do combat training? Why is it relevant to mission readiness? Well, for one thing, combat training demands consistent effort, precision, and concentration, which fosters mental resilience and self-discipline. So you're learning discipline and focus as you're studying your combat system of choice. It enhances physical fitness. Again, different combat systems have different varying degrees, but regular training improves your strength, your coordination, your agility and endurance, and ensures participants are physically prepared for demanding missions. Even target shooting does this to a certain extent. The scope of that might be a lot more limited than something like Krav Maga or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a lot more acrobatic. But even so, you're learning to a particular kind of fitness. You're learning to monitor your own body and your own physical condition, and that in itself is a form of fitness. It teaches you situational awareness, because combat training develops acute observation skills and quick decision making, which are critical in high pressure environments. This is universal to almost all combat training systems, even target shooting. You need to be able to make decisions in the heat of the moment. For example, if you're plinking, if you're doing long range target shooting, especially outdoors, you need to be able to adjust your approach based on changes in the wind speed, which here in a place like Cape Town, South Africa, is a non-trivial factor. The wind can be quite rough here, and it can change speed and direction very quickly. You need to be able to make those quick adjustments in the moment as you are about to squeeze that trigger. But also critically important in any kind of hand-to-hand combat training system, you need to be able to adjust and adapt to what your sparring partner is doing so that you can counter his moves and deliver your point scoring blows against him. Excuse me, let me take a sip of my beverage. Apologies. All right. You learn about teamwork and coordination. So many combat disciplines like paintball or martial arts sparring emphasize collaboration and importance of synchronizing efforts within a team. But sparring might sound a little unintuitive to those who are not familiar with this kind of activity. So sparring is a thing that you do in hand-to-hand combat sports. We also do that in HEMA with our training weapons. And it sounds like you're fighting against the other person, but actually the other person is your training partner. You are on the same side. You are practicing your moves against each other in order to help make each other stronger. So although it feels like it's a competitive activity because you're trying to beat the other person, actually you're working together. You're on a team. He is your partner, not your opponent. When you're getting to a competitive setting where you're playing in a tournament or something like that, then the person you're fighting against is perhaps less your partner and more your opponent, because now the competitive aspect becomes more important than the mutual honing of skills. But at least while you are in the practicing environment and you're sparring there, then your opponent, the person you're fighting against, is your partner. They are on your team, not the opposing team. Other benefits are, in addition to just the physical side of it, but overall, combat training can help you with stress management. So the high intensity nature of combat activities, especially when it comes to hand-to-hand combat training, a great example of this is boxing. Boxing, one of the most important things boxing teaches you, in my opinion, having never actually learned boxing, but having heard a lot of people talking about it who have spent a lot of time studying boxing. Arguably, the most important thing boxing teaches you is how to take a punch to the face and not lose your cool. So there's something very particular about being punched in the nose that triggers an adrenal response, which can send you into a blind rage, which will then make you completely ineffective in a combat situation. But with boxing, because you're getting hit in the face so often, it's kind of the point. You are forced, as you learn the sport, to learn how to take that punch to the nose and being able to manage and regulate that adrenal response. And regulating adrenal responses is really just stress management. That's what day-to-day stress management is being able to recognize and observe that adrenal response in your own body and choosing whether or not you allow it to overtake you. You can decide, if you have trained yourself to do so, you can decide not to let that adrenal response turn you into a blind rage, fly off the handle, and act irrationally. If you can learn to master yourself to such a degree that you are still in complete control after taking a punch to the face, then you have learned a skill that will serve you very well in day-to-day life. So stress management is a vital component of combat training, especially in combat sports, even in HEMA. Although I'm not taking punches to the face, I'm wearing a full protective face mask. If somebody manages to get a blow right onto my face mask, it's loud, it's noisy, it hurts a little bit, and it can be very difficult not to succumb to the adrenal response. Another thing it teaches you, and again, very important, and I think this is one of the most important things you can learn from martial arts or any combat training system, is the mastery of a combat discipline instills a sense of personal competence and assurance in one's abilities, reinforcing readiness for any situation. So it helps to improve your confidence and self-efficacy. Learning how to appreciate yourself as an agent, as a force in the world, is invaluable, and it's probably the second most valuable thing that you can learn from studying a combat system. Also learn to enhance your strategic thinking. So combat scenarios require planning, adaptability, and anticipation of an opponent's moves, which sharpens your strategic and tactical skills. So what it does is it helps to lay down cognitive pathways in your brain that help you to learn to adapt to strategies that you know your opponent is going to employ. Fencing is a good example of this. So if you can see that your opponent is holding his body in a particular way, you know he's going to strike in a specific way. And there's usually only one or two options that you have in order to parry that blow in such a way that you can then riposte and deliver a counter blow. And you have to do that very, very quickly in a fraction of a second. Learning how to develop those pathways and strategize and counter-strategize against your opponent in that way is an invaluable skill, which again will serve you in many other aspects of your life. And then there is the respect for force. So training teaches participants to use force responsibly, emphasizing control, restraint, and ethical application of skills. There's a famous interview that you might have seen with Jordan Peterson. I know that he's something of a controversial figure, but he says some interesting things sometimes, and I'm not going to quote him word for word, but he says something to the effect of being a pacifist, if you have no capacity for violence, is meaningless, because you're not actually choosing to be a pacifist, you just have no ability to do any violence to anybody. If you have the capacity for violence, if you can do damage to other people and you choose not to because you've learned to control it, that means something. That makes you an honorable and ethical and moral person. Having the capacity to do damage and choosing not to, that is what matters. And there are plenty of examples of this in Star Trek canon. The one that comes to mind is the original series Mirror, Mirror, when Kirk has beamed down, this is Prime Kirk, has beamed down to the planet, and he's trying to convince the locals to part with some of their precious minerals for the Federation. The alien ambassador reminds Kirk that, well, we have no weapons. We can't stop you from taking these precious minerals. And Kirk reminds them that, yes, we could take them from you, but we're not going to, because that's not how we roll. That is the demonstration of an ethical person, and having that ability to direct force, to do damage, to perform violence, and choosing not to do that, that is what makes you a formidable force that can be counted on, because you are also honorable and ethical. So these are the principles that ensure that Dauntless crew members are prepared not only for physical challenges, but also for mental and emotional demands, solidifying our readiness for any mission. All right, I've already covered how to participate in the combat training program. I was going to talk about that here, but it's fine. We've already covered that. That's all good. So let's talk about the Starfleet values and ethical considerations of combat training. So competitive activities like combat training, especially if you're sparring or doing something like having a paintball or a laser tag session, but this also applies to gaming, definitely aligns with Starfleet values because it allows us the opportunity to sharpen our skills against each other. So even though we're competing against each other, we are, as I mentioned, with sparring partners, we're using each other to bolster each other up. So we're not just using each other, we are also helping each other to improve each other's skills. Now, Starfleet values truth. The first duty of every officer is the truth. But also things like equality, effort, teamwork, and functioning within the rules. Playing by the rules, fair play is the Starfleet way. And these are the kinds of things that are not only promoted, but are essential when it comes to combat training. This is the kind of thing that you learn when you are studying combat systems, especially martial arts, is all of these kinds of things. So there's no room for falsehood when you are dealing with direct physical force, although there might be a tactical value in misdirection or deception when trying to feign a blow to the right when you're actually going to be striking from the left. When again, that's a fencing analogy. The truth of the blow is undeniable, and the first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. Now, integrity is again something that you learn from martial arts. You learn how you are an agent in the world and how your actions affect the people around you. And learning how to manage that in such a way that people can rely on you, that is integrity. And that is a skill that you learn through combat training. And that includes fair play and honesty and respecting your opponents. So remember, again, your opponent is not your enemy, your opponent is your partner. So even though you might want to strike a winning blow against your partner, they are on your side. So respecting them and the skill that they have and their ability to prevent you from doing so, that is inherent to any kind of combat sport. There's also the aspect of compassion. So you want to be avoiding toxic behavior like harassment or cheating or anything like that. Um, Good sportsmanship is essential in combat training because you are fighting with your body most of the time. You're directing your bodily force against somebody else's bodily force. And if you're fighting against an opponent who perhaps doesn't match your skill level, you need to learn to regulate yourself in that way, and also to be polite and helpful in assisting them in gaining the skill that they are there to learn. Because excellence, which is something that we all strive for in Starfleet, and especially on the Dauntless, because on the Dauntless we work hard and we play hard, but we don't mess around, which is a long way of saying that we strive for excellence in everything that we do. Excellence means fostering skill improvement and knowledge. So that is a value that is inescapable, that we are interested in fostering excellence, which means being true to our word, which means uh, servicing the truth as our first duty, and respecting our opponents even in competitive settings. Right, that is all the material I needed to cover today, which is relatively and mercifully brief, and I appreciate everybody for joining us here today. Let's see if we've got any comments or questions that have come through. We've got a couple. From Master Chief Kotzer: is shouting constructively in situations to de-escalate a physical confrontation also considered a form of combat training? Not in itself. So let's talk about debating. So debating is kind of a form of fighting with words, as it were, but that would not satisfy the definition of combat training from the Dauntless point of view. Combat training is specifically refers to the physical application of force. Shouting at somebody, while it might be beneficial and it might be better to de-escalate a potential combat situation before it arises, and shouting might help you do that. That is not what we would consider combat training. Oh, this is an important person, actually, a position. Important point. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you for reminding me of that, Master Chief. And that is the aspect of self-defense and why we learn to fight at all. Why specifically fighting as opposed to other forms of practical physical training like dancing or yoga, which have their benefits too. But why the ability to fight? Aside from just from learning the how to be an agent in the world and how to direct force on somebody, there are physical applications for learning how to do that. And while we are, again, not a military organization, we're not interested in fighting people. We don't have enemies. We don't fight wars. That is not what we do. We don't encourage our members. In fact, we actively discourage our members from carrying weapons when they're on duty. There are occasions in which you might have to draw upon physical combat training in the real world. Although most people are good most of the time, there are people out there who might have ill will towards you. And if you are equipped with the ability to defend yourself in some way or another, that could be beneficial to you. You might be able to survive a situation which otherwise might not be survivable. So even from a purely self-defense point of view, combat training is beneficial. The utility of learning how to fight with a longsword or a cudgel or a halberd might not be that useful in a self-defense situation. But so HEMA perhaps has limited utility in that from that point of view. Although I might argue that learning how to fight with a short sword, something like a dusak, might have some self-defense utility. Although, no, don't listen to me. You can't carry around a dusak. It's illegal in South Africa. You can't carry around a large knife. It's not okay. But maybe you can use similar techniques to wield a stick in self-defense or something. I don't know. But anyway, the ability and the understanding that you have the ability to direct force against somebody who might wish you ill might give you equip you with the confidence that you need to de-escalate and extract yourself from a potentially violent situation in which you might have otherwise suffered damage or loss. So combat training has real-world utility, even though we here on the Dauntless do not encourage actual fighting. And there are situations where that might even be essential. It's something that we've never done, but I know it's a thing that some chapters do, which is when there is a local science fiction convention that's run by some or other local fan group. Some chapters will offer to do convention security for that convention. So you have uniformed Starfleet officers running security for the convention, posted at all the entrances and exits and helping to man the entrance booth and that kind of thing. Again, the Nautilus has never done this, but it's perhaps something we might decide to do someday. The ability to work security at a convention, is your effectiveness is drastically improved if you actually have the ability to direct physical force against somebody who might otherwise want to behave badly. It's a reality that if somebody has perhaps had something too much to drink or otherwise compromised in their judgment, they might want to do some harm to the convention or to the people there. And as a security guard on duty, you are the first line of defense against that threat. Please don't engage violently with anybody, especially somebody who is intent on doing violence, but you might want to defend yourself and extract yourself from that situation long enough for the authorities to arrive. So if we ever decided to do something like that, combat training would be strongly recommended for the crew members who wanted to participate in that. Next question. From Colonel Hubert. So if I was to practice Krav Maga or self-defense or something via YouTube videos or other online course, would that count for combat training? Yes, it would, absolutely. Not everybody can reasonably or practically get to a physical club, especially of a modality that they choose to practice. Like I said, I study HEMA on my own because my nearest club is just too far away to drive regularly, although I do maintain good relationship with those guys and I'll go and participate with their special events from time to time. I simply can't visit the club weekly. So I study on my own, I practice on my own, and if you can do that, so much the better. Generally speaking, so the one thing about practicing on your own that is suboptimal is that it deprives you of the option of sparring. Sparring is a very important practice when it comes to learning any kind of martial art. You need to be able to exercise the skills that you've acquired in an actual combat situation or a simulated combat situation against another person, so that you can see how well it works. And that's something that I don't get when I'm studying on my own, which is why I like to go to my nearby HEMA club and participate in their special events from time to time, just so that I can get a little bit of that experience. I'm hoping that someday somebody will open a HEMA club somewhere nearby me. No, I'm not going to do it myself. I don't have the capacity to open yet another club. But if someone else were to do it, I would happily join that club. But yes, practicing on your own, studying on your own, is suboptimal, but it would definitely count towards the combat training challenge. So karate counts. Karate definitely counts, Commander Shimali. So if you are still active in your karate club, please log your hours with the combat training challenge. I can see you've shared some photographs of yourself. I can't see them big enough on my screen to see what's happening, but I assume that you're one of the people in those photographs. And that you are a karate person. So please, if you are still active in that, that's definitely something that would count towards combat training. So please submit your hours for that. Commander Shimali says, I feel like HEMA skills are transferable. It might not be a short sword that you end up defending yourself with, but maybe a piece of rebar that is lying around or a stick or something. You're probably correct. That's probably true. In fact, when I'm doing my solo drills at the gym, rather than carrying around a big sword, even though my swords are not made of steel, they're made of synthetic resin with a steel core, so they look real-ish, but they're clearly not real. That might freak people out a little bit. So I just take a little shortened piece of broom handle, sort of 1/2 meter long, and I use that as my pretend sword while I'm doing my drills. But I still get funny looks. But it's fine. There are certain sword fighting techniques, especially as I said, Dusak is a great modality for learning how to handle a relatively short weapon. Dusak is essentially a what's that? We call it a panga here in South Africa, but there's another word that they use elsewhere. No, I've forgotten what it is. But it's a single blade machete. Thank you very much. It's a kind of machete. So a machete is basically a short sword that can also be used as a tool. You can buy them at Builder's Warehouse and go get yourself a live steel sword if you want to, but don't use it on anybody, please. But the skills that you learn for a Dusak would definitely be transferable to a machete if you wanted to use one of those. All right. I think that is probably everything we needed to cover, and I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment. So I'm going to call it there. Thank you everybody for joining us, and I'd like to just conclude by saying that Combat training is an important component of mission readiness as it enhances physical fitness, which is crucial for performing duties, improving cognitive function, and reducing risk of illness. Combat training also helps members to measure their progress against each other in a collaborative environment. Furthermore, participation in combat training and other fitness programs embodies the values of Starfleet and contributes towards the mission of the USS Dauntless. All right, that is everything for this time. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out. The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes